Hello again, Steve here with a few comments about Anachapulco, and in reference especially to freedom and how people sort of behave in a state of freedom, I guess, just an observation. Now, first of all, my comments here are a little bit from experience. I was a guest speaker at Anachapulco in 2016. So I saw a little bit of the early stages. I think that was the second year of Anachapulco, and now it's grown into more of an event. Anybody who's doing something along the lines of freedom, I definitely give a thumbs up to. Just to say that. Now, my prediction was that basically, events like this will run into their inevitable troubles. First of all, anybody who tries to do something along the lines of freedom, as I've said before, freedom has always been illegal by every ruling psychopath who's ever existed, and that includes everybody in the government. Fundamental freedom has always been illegal, and therefore anybody who tries to be free is going to be stymied along the way. So as long as it's a small group of anarchists getting along in Acapulco, everything's going to be fine. But if it grows into something large, it will be shut down, and you start to see the troubles happening. I mean, I don't think it's any surprise that a prominent anarchist was murdered, gunned down in Acapulco a week or so ago, just about a week before in Acapulco. I don't think that's any. It's so close that it looks like some sort of a hit to me, a takedown. And of course, also, from who, I don't know, I wouldn't suggest, but it looked like it could be a hired hit. And of course, the guy who was gunned down, he was running a competitive. Apparently, he was running some sort of a competitive event called Narco Forco. So maybe there was some rivalry there. I don't know. Uh, but the other thing too is, to have something centrally planned is a complete no-no when it comes to anarchists, because the idea of anarchists is, I'm my own boss. I own my life. I own myself. So, whereas, you know, statist-minded organizations, they'll have a top-down structure where there'll be one dictator and everybody else follows. But that's not the case. But one of the things I think that's unfortunate, even though, yeah, sure, everybody wants to naturally have their freedom, I don't get why it is that some people, well, I sort of do in a way, and it goes contrary to real anarchy, which is that it seems that people don't like other people because something they're doing they disagree with. In other words, rather than looking at the whole package, people start getting pissed off at one another. And that's kind of unfortunate. And my hope is to encourage people to look, if somebody's pointing in the direction of freedom, and even if they're a statist, but they're into more freedom than they used to be, that's a path of freedom, right? Success, as who was it said once said, that success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. I think freedom's a worthy ideal. Absolutely. So anybody who's pointing in that direction, I say, good on you. And that's why I support people who are, if somebody is a leftist and they become a right winger, I say thumbs up. If somebody's a Democrat or a liberal and they become a conservative or a Republican, thumbs up, because that's the direction of greater freedom. Yes, they're all embedded with socialism and statism, but it's like, if I was a slave and I had the option of being owned by a really mean slave owner or a more gentle slave owner, of course, I'd rather the gentle slave owner. It's not that I'm condoning slavery. It's the direction in which I'm moving. That's what I'm saying. So, examples of how you get this infighting is, I read a while back that somebody was pissed off at Larkin Rose and Amanda Ratkwitz because they were, I don't know, getting on or something. And then I saw Adam Kokesh come out with a big beef against Jeff Berwick. And, when I was down there, there was a suggestion there was a question and answer at the end. Hey, who would you suggest we have back as a speaker? I said, how about you invite, you know, um, Stefan Molyneux? And the organizer said, nope, Stefan will never be here. He's not an anarchist anymore because he believes in blah, blah, I don't know what. But, I mean, Sure, he might not be an anarchist, as pure anarchist as you think you are, but you know what? He's promoting the ideas of freedom. So how about it, right? I mean, you're getting guys like Andrew Napolitano and I mean Ron Paul and so on. These guys are statists. They have to be. They're politically connected, right? Anyways, that's my question is why not be open to different versions of the idea of freedom and have a free speech forum where everybody can input and people can make up their own mind. I think might not be a bad idea. So I don't know. I guess it's not much of a. I really enjoyed. By the way, I really enjoyed Anachapulco, and I would like to go back at some point. It's not going to work this year. Didn't work last year, but yeah, I just had the sense that when freedom breaks out in terms of a larger group and it starts to become popular, of course the control freaks of the world are going to clamp down on it and are going to create agitation from within. So I don't think that I don't think that I'm not saying that any of these things that are happening, like the squabbles that are going on and the recent shooting, and so I'm not saying I'm not a conspiracy theorist enough to think, oh, this was a CIA hit or there's agitators within. I think that's inevitable, but also it will be. I mean, you look at the hit pieces that were written about this guy who was shot. I mean, it's just a lot of it's just nonsense. They're making up things and saying he is this and is that. I don't know what he is. I wouldn't believe them. I wouldn't believe Huffington Post as far as I'd believe, the National Enquirer any more than I would, that is to say. But, I think if our goal is freedom and we disagree with somebody on somewhat of a level, say that you're a complete anarchist, right? And there's somebody else who's a statist, but at least they've moved from more of a socialist statist to a more, say more of a Mises or a minarchist, let's say, or a libertarian, but they're still a statist. Well, that's a good move. That's somebody. That's somebody I'd like to talk to. But rather than say, nope, you're not an anarchist, therefore I don't want to talk to you or whatever, that sounds. That's kind of funny. How about we seek to understand, and if we get the impression that somebody is truly interested in freedom, how about we embrace that? How about we embrace that individual? See, I'll come back to this little story I had one time, because sometimes when we talk about things, we talk about freedom, we talk about this, we talk about that, the words that we're using actually have a different meaning in our head than in somebody else's head. I mean, I told this story before, but it's worth saying again, I think, to be illustrative. Two friends of mine one time in an event coffee shop, they were arguing over capitalism. One guy thought capitalism was great. The other guy thought capitalism is the bane of humanity. And it became quite heated. I mean, you could see the redding in the faces and a little emotional and so on. And I finally said to them, I said, guys, I said, you first, what is your definition of capitalism? And then after he said it, I turned to the next guy, what's your definition of capitalism? Turns out they had two different meanings of capitalism, of the word capitalism. And then when they adjusted for those meanings, they actually agreed on most of the stuff. So this is what happens sometimes is we get an idea that somebody thinks a certain way because of what they said or what they heard or what they've heard somebody say about them or whatever, and say, well, that person's out of my life now. That doesn't make much sense. For example, I heard one guy in the anarchist community suggest that Stefan Molyneux is now a complete statist because he agrees with everything Donald Trump says. Well, I've listened to a lot of podcasts and so on, Stefan Molyneux, and I haven't seen any of that. He's never said that. I suspect this individual heard somebody say that who for some reason does not like Stefan Molyneux and didn't take the time to figure out. See, a lot of people, the human nature is we've got a bias, right? And we want to protect that bias. So as soon as we hear something remotely close, then we can pounce on it, but not do our homework in terms of looking at the other side. Look at the Covington kids, those guys that were wearing the MAGA hats, right? CNN, New York Times, all those big publishing houses, as soon as they saw any hint that these MAGA hat wearing kids were being rude to this Native American Indian and these black people on the side of the road, they just completely pounced on it. Turns out Everything they said was false. And furthermore, they basically went after, there was death threats against these kids and so on. And these were minors. These kids were like 18, 16 years old and stuff like that. And now there's a huge, massive defamation lawsuit against a lot of these organizations. It's going to damage them greatly, which is great in a way because they're pretty evil. A lot of these outfits that go after people without even checking things. I mean, they're not just the average cut of life. At least these anarchists, they're not claiming to be professionals. If you're a reporter at the New York Times and you report that a kid 16 years old was doing X, Y, Z, and what you're saying is causing bomb threats against his school and stuff like that, and you haven't bothered to check, especially when videotape was out at the time when you were making that story, that's pretty harsh. So the lesson to all of us, I guess, is to listen more. To what is somebody else saying? What are they really saying? And especially along the lines of freedom. When we see freedom-minded people, these are people who don't want to be controlled by other people. So therefore, we can't drive them in a direction. It's like trying to herd, I don't know, flies or something. They just go in all directions. It's not going to happen. So we have to seek to understand. And when we seek to understand, when we realize, you know what, in many areas we agree. Let's agree to focus on where we agree, and let's build bridges. Let's build strength, because you know what? Whenever we're disagreeing, it's very easy for infiltrators to come in. Because mark my word, when you have a movement like freedom movement that grows big enough, you're going to have infiltrators come in. Don't forget rather that the U.S. as an example, they banned anarchists in the early 20th century. That was one of the classes of people that weren't allowed to move to America. If you were an anarchist, you weren't allowed. They had a long history of, all statist organizations have a long history of pillorying and creating falsehoods about anarchists, right? What is an anarchist? An anarchist is a voluntarist. An anarchist isn't somebody. So what have they done what has the mainstream turned the term anarchist into? Bunch of hooligans throwing rocks, like smashing windows and burning cars and flipping them over and so on. That's their definition of an anarchist. That's not an anarchist, that's a terrorist, right? An anarchist is somebody who says, you know what? I don't have any rulers, except unless I believe in God, that's my ruler. Nobody owns me, right? Isn't that what we've said? Isn't that we've all agreed to say that we can't own other people, right? So if we can't own any other people, that means nobody owns us. And by that definition, we are all anarchists. If we're not anarchists, we're slaves. Anarchist doesn't mean no rules. No. It means no rulers. It means we have, among all the men and women in this world, nobody is above us, right? Nobody has the right to dictate to us what to do. And if they do, they own us. That is slavery. That is involuntary servitude, which is slavery. So my suggestion, one man just saying it, if we can figure out how to get along, figure out how to build bridges, figure out what we have in common. Just like when those two guys were arguing over capitalism, when they finally sat down to figure out what they each meant by capitalism, they realized that they actually had different definitions. And when they normalized for those definitions, they had more bridges than they had bombs against each other. And that, I think, is important. So think about that maybe when in your quest for freedom, your friend is anybody who's heading in the direction of freedom. So try to build a bridge with those. Make alliances. We need all the help we can get to create a freer world. Because Lord knows there's lots of forces to take freedom apart, dismantle it, and throw into the ash heap of history. There's lots of people who want that. There's lots of people who want us to be slaves again. Steve here, getting great chatting. And if you like what I'm doing, please like, subscribe, and share, and comment in the box below. And we'll talk again soon. Bye for now.